So it's a pleasure and an honor to be here as part of the launch team of the Tomorrow. And it's especially because I have a double connection to this as one of the contributing members to Stefano Boeri's team, Pierpaolo Tommaso and so on, but also as the artistic director of Matera 2019. And we are really proud to be supporting this project. We believe that this is an incredibly important step in thinking about new ways for culture to be, for Europe to be a laboratory for a new cultural production over the next decade. So it's our pleasure to have Amos Gitai with us today. Amos is an Israeli filmmaker renowned for such works as Home, Kadosh, Kippur, and the Border Trilogy, and Lullaby to My Father. In 2008, he received the Leopard of Honor at the Locarno International Film Festival. His work has been displayed in solo exhibitions at Reina Sofia in 2014, Palais de Tokyo in 2011, Tel Aviv Museum of Art in 2009, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 2008, as well as others. He received a PhD in architecture from the University of California, Berkeley. Welcome, and thank you. I would like to start, before moving towards themes that are closer to the Tomorrow and about narratives for Europe and narratives in general, which I think is a very strong theme in your work. I have always been completely blown away and fascinated by Home, the story of this extraordinary building, how you actually managed to use something as static as architecture to talk about something as dynamic as a society in flux. And in a way, you actually used the building as a narrative form. Maybe you could say a few words about this.
I'm happy to be here. And first of all, I want to say something to you, Hans-Ulrich, and then I'll get back. I think, Hans-Ulrich, you did something. You know, artists, filmmakers, architects, we don't have real power. Our only power is symbolic. So when Switzerland voted to exclude first people from the big periphery, let's say North Africa, East Europe and so on, and later on recently to exclude all the Europeans as possible, you do the opposite. You create a stage of exchange, of culture, and I think this is one of the only things a thinker can do is actually in this very little symbol to say, okay, you know, dialogue has to continue. Let's stop the provincialism, the powers which overrule more and more Europe. And so I think it's great. I would even recommend to my own countrymen, to the Israeli Pavilion, to do a similar gesture in one of the years to open the Israeli Pavilion and invite the Palestinians to present their work in the Israeli Pavilion.
I would like to add to that the Korean pavilion that is right next to us here is also a dual pavilion for North Korea and South Korea for the first time in history, curated by Min-Suk Cho. So I think this is really a very important idea.
So, because I think that, you know, okay, I mean, what is culture? Culture is an object. It can be traded. It can produce money, wealth, etc. But culture is also a kind of equation, a philosophical thinking about humanity, about reconciliation. And I think that let's not neglect this option. I think that people believe a lot, more and more, unfortunately, in greed and machine guns. And I think we have not to lose the belief in ideas. Ideas also have moved the world. And I'm very surprised that the current politics of my own country, that they lost this idea about the belief in ideas. Otherwise, with all due respect, Jews would not have existed so long. They exist because they believed in ideas. You know? So let's keep believing in ideas. Let's keep believing in art, culture, cinema as a form of dialogue. And this is the first theme. And the second one is, and I think I will speak both about architecture and cinema. I think that we have been seduced more and more in the last, let's say, 50 years to go for the spectacular. I was trying, because I made a speech in France, to look for the French term of understatement, but actually it doesn't exist in the French language. You know? So I think we should go back to understatement, you know. With all due respect to spectacular architecture, architecture is also about designing a 70 or 80 square meter apartment with good layout, with reasonable, agreeable space for working people, and not just spectacular architecture, you know. So since this is a Biennale of architecture, I think that architects, the very talented architects, have to go back to give us some good areas of living, you know. For me, the recent phenomena of xenophobic and right-wing parties in Europe, which is very unfortunate, is also about that. It's also the divorce of the real establishment from the basic parameters that they have to provide living spaces. And so I think it represents a big angoisse that people don't even know anymore how to shake. So they go, unfortunately, to these extremist, racist directions.
And how do you think...
So I will go to your question. I'm sorry of making this detour, excuse me. So, you know, in this project, in this cinematic project, because as Hans-Ulrich mentioned, I was formed as an architect, son of an architect, father to an architect, you know. So we are a chain of architects. But in this very early project, I was interested in how can I use a building like a metaphor, you know. So House, which is considered to be my first film that I did more than 30 years ago, takes this one building, which was Palestinian until 1948, until the 1948 war. Then the Israeli government took it over and installed a couple which came from Colombia, from the Sahara, from the Algerian Sahara. And later there is a very big economist who converts this building into a mansion, but in order to do that, he has to take stones from the mountains of Hebron and workers from the refugee camps. So the house, a piece of architecture, become also, there is the architectural archaeology, but there is the human layers, the human archaeology. So this film, which is actually quite calm, created a big stir. Anyway, launched my work as a filmmaker. I was treated in all sorts of names just because the film actually doesn't say anything which was news, but just by installing the voisinage between these different biographies. So I think that the two disciplines, architecture and cinema, have a lot in common. They both start with a text. We have a text, and we have to transform it into form. We have to translate. We have to go through the intellectual procedure of giving shape to words, and also installing rhythm, and installing space, and installing time. So I think in different films, this was the job that I was trying to do.
And in what you were talking about before, the importance of relaunching cultural production as a unifying, almost as a political project within Europe. And I think this is one of the central ambitions of the Tomorrow, and certainly it's one of the central ambitions of Matera, and I think this is something that's already happening here in the space. This is not simply a cultural project, it's not about architecture, it's really actually about, it's a political statement, as you said before. And this was really the idea at the basis of the Fun Palace. And I think it's very interesting what Freak was saying before, that the Fun Palace as an architectural product was realized, but it was actually not so much about architecture, it was a way of thinking about cultural production. What institutions do you think we need in the coming decades? How can we actually, what do we need to build in order for this vision of cultural production to become real?
I mean, I think that, you know, frankly, it's a big question, because the best of culture is subversive. It's not institutionalized. It's putting questions, and it's always a very difficult dialectics between powers who have to finance the cultural activities and the artists who have to put valuable questions and to disregard institutional interests, which are very powerful and become more and more powerful and more crushing, both for architects, filmmakers, writers, and so on. So distribution, which is the mean of controlling thought, is becoming more and more problematic. But we still have to be loyal to these ingredients. I suppose that part of the question that Kulas wanted to do in doing almost a kind of a student proposition of going to these very early ingredients, although in my taste it's a bit too postmodern. I would make it a bit more sober, but that's his right, you know, he's the curator. So is to go back to these basic parameters. You know, what do we start with? What is the basic ingredients of architects or artists, or in this case, filmmakers? And I think we have to go on asking questions and to realize that, as I said, the planet has moved also by ideas. Let's not underestimate the power of ideas. We have to consistently ask questions and not accept. That's why I launched my proposition to my countrymen from the Israeli Pavilion to invite Palestine to use this pavilion and to have a stage of their own. In this way, artists do not have to obey the institutional political divisions. We don't have to accept it. It's not given by God. We have to challenge it.
I think we have time for one very short question. Do you have one for? Otherwise,
I've got a last question for Amos, but you should ask the second last question.
Okay. My second last question, I was quite curious because they say once an architect, always an architect, or at least I think someone. And did you ever feel a temptation to take on architecture again and to practice as an architect?
I mean, I'm doing right now a project with Herzog and Demorand, which we will put some of these questions. And I will also design myself a center for masterclass next to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is maybe the birth of the thoughts of the three great monotheistic religions. And this will be maybe my little architectural gestures in good memories of what Hans-Ulrich mentioned, my father, who came to see Gropius and was sent first to be a carpenter, to work on the material, on the wood. So I would love to do this one project of architecture.
And that leads us to the very last question. I mean, Joseph raised the issue of the institutions, and we have here the Fun Palace of Cedric, you know, in the center of the pavilion. Is an unrealized institution Cedric wanted to build for the 20th and 21st century with a limited lifespan, so. And he always, you know, referred to it as a very concrete project. He worked with engineers and he worked with a cybernetician. So it wasn't a kind of a 60s project, you know, more like Archigram, which had to do with dreaming. It was really a very concrete utopia. So Amos, my last question is about your unrealized project. If you have a concrete utopia, an institution you want to build, something, because you've told us about many projects today, you've told us about the house you're about to build, but what are your unbuilt roads?
I mean, I'm building, you know, when I sign my film, I write architect and film builder. So I think I'm interested, you know, the advantage of cinema is that it is a phantom. So it doesn't leave a trace. It just leave a trace in the memory, that's all. So when the film is over, we have no object. Architecture sometimes is problematic. I mean, they leave stuff behind that we actually don't like at all, you know. And we have quite a lot of it around us. So I would be satisfied in building this one building next to the Dead Sea. I know the terrain. I know this little spot of land which was agreed with a little kibbutz, which is next to the Dead Sea. And if I can, I would, when I do it, if I can invite people of the region to try and cross borders, I think this would be satisfactory as architecture.
Amos and Joseph, thank you so very much. Thank you.